Screen okay?
Earthkeeper.
Yeah, okay. So, and can you still see me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm new at this. So this is fabulous, Lisa. It's all the same. You're giving a particular, and I'm going to give a more general, I think. And it's worth a long discussion. Yeah. So I want to say, before I begin the review of Jason Wirth's book, I want to express heartfelt deep gratitude to all the people, places, deities, powers, seen and unseen, who have made this epical turning of the great wheel possible, to which we're hanging on for dear life right now, and which was so wondrously symbolically marked in January of this year. And gratitude to all who are enacting this shared vision of renewal and ongoing awakening. And may we honor and give back to the great Mother Earth who has birthed us all, to the Great Earth Sangha with every breath. Om Ahung. So I'm going to read a poem. From Earthkeeper. I return to the towering rock tree on a vision quest. For 4 days, I visit and sleep in the small tent that I have brought for shelter. On the night of the 4th day, my secret vision comes to me, and I am the warrior I was meant to be. The rock tree looms on the night sky, and the Big Dipper rides above it. The stars are again my 7 sisters, and I am again the boy who turned into a bear. I am Tsoe Tali, rock tree boy, and I will carry that name to the end of the world and beyond. I will keep to the trees and waters, and I will be the singing of the soil. In my truest being, I am a keeper of the earth. I will tell the ancient stories, and I will sing the holy songs. I belong to the land. This is N. Scott Momaday. And so may we now, with every breath, self-anoint as earth keepers and dream carriers. Living species are dying without us ever knowing they were speaking to us. And may we all inhabit our indigenous heart minds to speak and practice a new visionary science, integrating the archaic, magical, and mythical. In his novel, The Ancient Child, this is Momaday, about a boy who turns into a bear, Momaday quotes Borges, "For myth is at the beginning of literature and also at the end." Momaday is Kiowa. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and novelist, artist, a longtime professor, receiving his PhD in English and American literature at Stanford. He wrote poetry nonstop for 4 years, and this is for you, John. He studied Dylan Thomas, Hart Crane, Wallace Stevens, and Emily Dickinson. He is one of the most distinguished voices in American literature. David Bohm, my favorite quantum physicist, says, to which I alluded to just a few minutes ago, a fully matured groundswell of enlightened activity is stepping out and speaking out now from the unseen underworld where it lives, always ready for moments of collective transformation. So the first time I read Wirth's book, Mountains, Rivers, and the Great Earth, reading Gary Snyder and Dōgen in An Age of Ecological Crisis, I did so with my hands and heart held in reverent gratitude, and it's been a companion for remembering and refreshment ever since. I met Jason Wirth at the Jean Gebser conference, at the University of Seattle in 2016, where he's professor of philosophy in continental and Buddhist philosophy, aesthetics, and Africana philosophy. He's also a Buddhist priest in the Zen Soto lineage and sponsored the Gebser conference through his department. I was mightily impressed by the paper he presented titled Gary Snyder and the Great Potlatch, which began with the sentences, Gary Snyder can be thought of not only as a Buddhist elder, but also as a shaman. What does it mean to call a Buddhist ecological poet a shaman? It is with the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest in the world of the Great Potlatch where Jason's soul is firmly lodged, brimming with knowledge and passion assembled over decades. The following year, in 2017, after the conference, Mountain Rivers and the Great Earth was published. Wirth signs his preface, Tiokisin, Jason M. Wirth, City of Seattle, an ancestral home of the Duwamish, Ish River Country, Cascadia, Turtle Island. And that is the point. Wirth walks alongside Snyder in embodying a re-inhabitation of place and fully reclaiming and embracing his indigenous soul. And in the same spirit and quality of mind, practices, thinks, and writes along with Snyder with the same devotion to unmuddied language and good dreams. Snyder won the Pulitzer Prize for Turtle Island in 1975 with over 20 books of poetry and essay at that time. He's the poet laureate of Deep Ecology, an environmental activist with anarcho-primitivist leanings. He's translated literature into English from ancient Chinese and modern Japanese, and taught at UC Davis in Berkeley. Kitkitdzi has been Snyder's home base for the past 50 years. He was part of the Back to the Land movement in the 70s, yay, and built Kitkitdzi by hand, Zendo style, after spending a decade in Zen monasteries in Japan. Back to the ridge in the Sierra Nevadas in California. He returned to re-inhabit Turtle Island on this Nisenan tribal land. Nisenan was mislabeled as Maidu, is its own language and unique culture with customs, leaders, holy people, and a language with 13 dialects. And the Nisenan are still not recognized by the US government today. Tiokisin ghost horse, Cheyenne River Lakota, says that to re-inhabit is to learn the flowers, live light, live again in a way which is sustainable for thousands of years. Earth is source, not resource. Resilience is the grail. This is how my people live. Diversity is the sacred tree of life. We will have peace with the earth when we have peace with each other. And quickly here, I just want to have you look at this painting. It's by Gregory Cayete about interdependence through the native eye, and some of his extraordinary writings over the past many decades. Native science, natural laws of interdependence, native science, the indigenous mind rising, native science, astronomy through native eyes, finding the dynamic center of resonance in the multiverse. Resonance is the key to the whole understanding of the native science, sustainability and meaning, to resonate with interdependence. Here is Mesa Verde, which very near to Mesa Verde, I had an extraordinary vision in a kiva on ancient Anasazi land. And I wonder what happened to the other one. Excuse me. Oh, well. So I'm going to leave it here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So the preface to Mountains, Rivers, and the Great Earth is titled Milarepa's Stone Tower. And here's an image of Milarepa, and begins with a 1970 quote from Gary Snyder. "I became a poet that I might give voice to the songs I heard in nature and my inner ear, and that also by the power of song, I might contribute to the downfall of the technological industrial world, its total destruction, in favor of a world based on closer knowledge of nature in man himself." So if you're not aware of Milarepa, he's considered the greatest poet saint ever to appear in the history of Buddhism. He's known for his 100,000 songs, which are quite Rumi-esque. They're songs of awakening, and you can see with his hand at his ear, he's listening. And Milarepa is also part of the whispered lineages in Tibetan Buddhism. And he's also known, most famously probably, for losing his mind after seeking retribution for violent crimes which were committed against his family, including the murder of his father. And Milarepa went ahead and enacted a terrible revenge, after which he left his village and lost himself in the wilds for many, many years, looking for a teacher who might possibly help him. And he found Marpa, the translator, who had him build a stone tower, which entailed hand-carrying each boulder after boulder. And when Milarepa had completed the tower, Marpa ordered him to destroy it and start all over again, and did not consider him worthy of teachings until he had built and destroyed 3 stone towers. A beautiful song, poetic and analytical, is a revolving door inside and outside of the wisdom of paradox, from our indigenous souls beating the drums of our hearts. So Wirth's book is about reading Gary Snyder, and to a lesser but of equal import, reading the great Kamakura period Zen master Ehe Dōgen, 1200 to 1253. His title is an exact blood relation to Snyder's 1996 collection of poetry called Mountains and Rivers Without End. Both books invite meditative and philosophical engagement with poetic and mythic image, and Dharma as the Tao, Tao as the wild, such that we may seek the same place and quality of mind to read, think, practice along with them in the same spirit as Snyder's devotion to unmuddied language and good dreams. For Snyder, Wirth, and Dōgen, practice is the cultivation of wisdom and compassion with our interdependent becoming with, through, and in some ways as all other life forms. Snyder translates the opening line of the Tao Te Ching, the way that can be followed is not the constant way, to a path that can be followed is not a spiritual path, because it is not in the end a path at all. There is a going but no goer, no destination, only the field, wilderness. In the Great Potlatch, the paper Wirth presented at the University of Seattle, which is the last chapter in this book, he writes, "I turn to Gary Snyder as another exercise in calling forth what Gebser calls the eruption in time and the 4th dimension as freedom from time, and the diaphanon, the non-dual freeing of space and time that is not bound to activity or passivity, light or darkness, but rather pervades or shines through them all." Snyder gives it both its new and old, that is, its aperspectival and archaic names, Tao, Dharma, the wild, and in this bioregion for Wirth, the Great Northwest, and for our present concerns, the potlatch. Let me quickly, I didn't have a chance to get this organized, I'm sorry. So is this the right one? Sort of. When Snyder won the Pulitzer Prize for Turtle Island, he asked, where were the prizes for the indigenous works? In Turtle Island and his work in general, he practices a thoroughgoing exploration of the inhabitory regimes of white privilege and a practice of solidarity with all beings. He does not speak for indigenous peoples, but rather with them. A Lakota elder at a New York public press conference at the time asked a friend to give a message to Snyder. Tell Snyder he's an Indian, and does he know it? And Snyder answered, I don't know if I'm an Indian or not. However, I do know that I'm a Native American. Anyone is, metaphorically speaking, a Native American who is born again on Turtle Island. Anyone who chooses consciously and deliberately to live on this continent. Myths, Snyder says, belong to the place, and they will come to belong to those who make themselves members of this place. Myths, being born again on Turtle Island is a re-inhabitation and new old name for the continent. It is to hearken to the voice of nature herself, whom the ancient poets called the great goddess, the Magna Mater, the great mother, who awakens as Tara. It is to overcome oneself and be reborn as the place that gives one to oneself. Re-inhabitation is to enter the potlatch of place, with its potlatch of places and Indra's net of palaces without end, old and new. Being reborn is initiation. It is a death, a search, a rebirth into a new world, with a ceremonial new name and a new old song, something to mark the new being. In Snyder's Mountains and Rivers Without End, we hear the humpbacked flute player. Ghost bison, ghost bears, ghost bighorns, ghost lynx, ghost pronghorns, ghost panthers, ghost marmots, ghost owls swirling and gathering, sweeping down in the power of a dance and a song. Then the white man will be gone. When the spirits of place, most now threatened or extinct and reduced to ghosts, return in the potlatch of place, the white man dies. Re-inhabitation is to learn to listen carefully, to hear with a whole mind. Snyder's undergraduate thesis on the Haida story, the man who turned birds in the village, who hunted birds in the village, laid the groundwork for his work of the next 60 years, in which he was attracted to women who married bears, and to men who married geese. Women who married bears and to men who married geese. The old tales and myths and stories are the songs of the human race, are a mode of access to original mind, indigenous mind, and the in-between. Tiokisin Ghost Horse says, we are all indigenous to Mother Earth. Our indigeneity goes back millions of years. We all inhabit indigenous mind. Our indigenous selves are bearers of the deepest insights into human nature, have lived sustainably over 1 million years, speak a relational language in which there's no such thing as separation, only language which inhabits interbeing. No I, only we. No domination, only alignment. Cuoratani, Ardoveci, Brigantes, Silures, Dumoni, Artabratis, Cinovantis. Each time I hear these words spoken, I cry because in them I heard echoes of some of my own tribes, which I'd never heard spoken. I need to discover and recite them. The resonance is thunderous. Those names were spoken 2, Matt McCartney, an international CEO, best practices business consultant from the Devon, Cornwall area, who had invited a group of North American shamans to his home to consult with them. And when they arrived, they asked, "Who are your tribes?" And Matt was confused. A translator repeated, "Please ask him what are the names of his ancestral tribes who lived on the land where he lives." And Matt was stunned into silence and ashamed, and finally said, "I don't know." And one of the shaman answered, "Coratani, Ardovici, Bregantes, Sailures, Dumoni, Artebrates, Trinovantes." These are the peoples of the Celtic soil and ghostly Gaelic languages. Just for a minute, this turtle here on the bottom called the painted turtle, I didn't know such a thing existed until I was up at Lake Invermere at the base of the Western Rockies in British Columbia. And we were on the edge of Lake Invermere, one of the most amazing lakes in the world. I think it's known for its length. And it's also the headwaters of the Columbia River. And there was a pond right next to the lake, and it was bubbling with painted turtles.
When I was a child, I had one as a pet.
Oh gosh. So they were native to your place?
I don't know. We got it at a pet store.
Oh. Okay. So Jung, can you see this whole thing, or do I have to move the screen in order for you to see the whole image? Can you see that entire image?
Which one?
The medicine wheel and the painting, are they both visible?
Mostly. The top of the medicine wheel is cut off and the bottom of the painting is cut off.
Okay, all right. So Jung claims his 2 million-year-old self, an ever-living autonomous archetypal presence. Together, the patient and I address ourselves to the 2 million-year-old man that is in all of us. In the last analysis, most of our difficulties come from losing contact with our instincts, with the age-old, unforgotten wisdom stored up in us. In losing our instincts, the wisdom of our original mind, Western man also lost contact with the earth, his own body, his soul. For it is the body, the feelings, the instincts which connect us to the soil. If you give up the past, you naturally detach from the past. You lose your roots in the soil, your connection with the totem ancestors that dwell in your soil. You turn outward and drift away and try to conquer other lands because you are exiled from your own soil. Finding, restoring, and making peace with our inner indigenous self and ancestors is one of the many-sided aspects of re-inhabitation. Perhaps rediscovering this archaic self or original mind is the most significant renewal practice we can do now. A practice, Snyder says, of deep unlearning. Snyder's Great Earth is the koan of the big potlatch of which we are all members. From the Nootka words for giving and gift is to transfer property in the context of a public feast and in effect to buy status. In the Haida Washkal potlatch, Wirth's home territory, public alterations to the person, the assumption of new names, receiving of tattoos, all such quantum leaps in personal identity require publication and acceptance, like a marriage or a graduation or a birth or a death. This is in the potlatch, these commodities are given in exchange for a promotion in social rank. This practice of potlatch threw Canadian and US missionaries and politicians into a hissy fit. They hated the potlatch. The Indian Commissioner G.M. Sproat on Vancouver Island in the 1860s, overseeing the displacement and eradication of the Nootka on Vancouver Island, wrote, "The system was based on the hoarding of goods, not for saving or investment, but for senseless waste. It is not possible that Indians can acquire property or become industrious with any good result while under the influence of this mania. This potlatch mania, in which the public rank of value of oneself was not part of the rational economic maintenance of one's self-interest, rather it was part of a tremendous festival of enriching the entire community. The house potlatch was the most spectacular and important of the Haida festivals. The house potlatch was required property that sometimes took 15 years to collect. It was the occasion of several months of storytelling, dancing, ceremonial acting, and the new status announcement, resulting in the group construction of a large new house and the raising of the totem pole. The Haida goal was not wealth in itself, but prestige that can be gained by overwhelming others with the distribution of wealth. Prestige based not on wealth, but the radical expenditure of wealth. I think we need this economy of self-worth right now. How about an addendum to the new Green Deal? If we change our status to a 501c4, we can legally lobby right alongside the personhood status of the ecocidal global corporations. Wirth cites Georges Bataille's famous economic analysis of potlatch within the paradigm of a classical form of exchange. One vanquishes one's rival by exceeding their capacity to dispose of as much wealth in the form of gifts. How does one profit from loss? He enriches himself with a contempt for riches, and what he proves to be miserly of is in fact his generosity. Loss is changed into acquisition. This has long been Snyder's sense of the feast, of communion, of puja, the act of reverence, honor, homage, adoration, worship, potlatch. He writes in Turtle Island, the power within, the more you give, the more you will have to give. Will still be in our source, will still be our source when coal and oil are gone and atoms are left to spin in peace. Wirth and Snyder invoke the Dharma, the big potlatch, as resonant with Mahayana Sutra, calling for the gathering of the assembly of all Buddhas, that is, the great Sangha of the earth, comprised of all sentient beings, from rock to redwood to whale to superhuman to bodhisattva. Not one piece of soil can be left out of potlatch Sangha or Dharma potlatch, in which we develop a new old variation of original mind or indigenous or archaic mind, which would include what Gebser called the awakening of the aperspectival as part of the awakening practice of re-inhabitation. In the practice of the wild in 2010, Snyder writes, the extinction of a species, each one a pilgrim of 4 billion years of evolution, is irreversible loss, and it will take many millions of years to replenish biodiversity to its pre-industrial levels. Hundreds of millions of years might elapse before the equivalent of a whale or an elephant is ever seen again, if ever. Way back in 1964, Snyder told a friend, there's not a strictly conscious reason why he holds the most archaic values on Earth, including the fertility of the soil, the magic of animals, the power vision of solitude, the common work of the tribe, the terrifying initiation and rebirth, the love and ecstasy of the dance, the common work of the tribe. They are not derived from books, as necessary as study is, but are rooted in the belly. It is to begin consciousness, including thinking, at its root in the hara, the dan tien, 4 finger widths below your navel, the elixir field, the sea of chi. It is to de-educate oneself, to practice a complementary deep unlearning, that is, to practice your original mind. before any books were put in, before language was invented. In deep unlearning in Snyder's poetry and the interrelated four teachings of non-self, emptiness, non-permanence, and dependent origination, it is the place of imagination, intuition, and vision to clarify the insights of scientific ecology in new and more consequential ways. Snyder has Buddhicized the notion of ecosystem and ecologized pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination. If you can understand this blade of rice, said the Buddha, you can understand the laws of interdependence and origination. If you understand the laws of interdependence and origination, you can understand the Dharma. If you understand the Dharma, you know the Buddha. That is, you know your own Buddha nature. Snyder calls us to reimagine our archaic communion with the Great Earth anew and again, anew and again. In the mind of the commons, one can no longer act with the whole web, without the whole web of life in mind. Buddhist interdependence teaches us that we are also only as good as the relationships that comprise us. We are in a systemic crisis, a spiritual crisis, a question of sacred practice, which is a working definition for spiritual. Wirth writes, one does not need to be a Buddhist in order to be in one's own way a bodhisattva, an awakened being, reborn to the great earth. Earth writes, Pope Francis cites Pope Benedict. The external deserts in the world are growing because the internal deserts have become so vast. The great earth is showing us who we are. She herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of the poor. Today, the crucified is earth. This brings to mind Pat McCabe, or Woman Stand Shining, Dine of the Navajo Nation, who speaks. Truth is the ways that our current global culture is killing our mother. Without her, we die. We've raped her, drilled her, and extracted her vital organs, poisoned the air she breathes, poisoned her blood, murdered her children, all species, over and over and over again. And just as under the reign of monotheistic patriarchal religion, killed, raped, molested, jailed those who were born female. So I haven't pictured here the oldest medicine wheel, but it's in Blackfoot Nation in Alberta, dating back to 3200 BCE. So in this great fourth turning of the wheel happening now, the planetary movement amongst Indigenous communities and those who are reclaiming their indigeneity are leading the movements for legal rights, that is, personhood rights, for rivers, lagoons, lakes, forests, mountains, oceans, ecosystems. And I ask, aho, in this ecocidal age, which requires legal rights, wrested from global corporations to the waters of life, is there a bigger madness imaginable? Why not cut to the chase, forget personhood status for mountains and rivers, and fight for personhood status for Mother Earth? This is so insane. All I can feel now is my rage speaking. This is the path we're on. The absurdity of this defies comprehension. Our mother does not have the right to live. This is what we've created. However, it is indigenous peoples within their communities for millions of years who have never stopped honoring her, singing her praises, dancing her heartbeats, never stopped giving back, never stopped grieving and celebrating with her, and now fighting for her right to live, to life. The Buddha, throughout the night, song after song. Dōgen's Great Earth and Snyder's Wild are both comprised of the play of waters and mountains, emptiness and form. All are interconnected paths. Snyder characterized his poetic cycle of mountains and rivers without end as a sort of sutra, an extended poetic, philosophic, and mythic narrative of the female Buddha Tara. Wild language is elemental language, and elemental language, as the wild song of Tara and Gaia, is a sutra language, as Dōgen revealed in his own Mountains and Rivers Sutra in the year 1240. The sutra is Tara and Gaia themselves, sansui, or landscape. The great earth is the interpenetration of yin and yang, waters and solids, emptiness and formed, unconditioned and interdependent beings in the spontaneous, organic autogenesis of Tao. To forget the self is to be continuously actualized by all beings simultaneously casting away and exploring the dropping away of body and mind. This is the splendor of every moment, the depth of each day, where all beings are inseparable from all beings. Dogon's own practice of the wild, what he called bendowa, is negotiating Tao and wholeheartedly practicing it. Dōgen and Snyder and Wirth use the language of seeing with one's ears and hearing with one's eye. How does one transmit Dharma? How does one speak elemental language? Dōgen addresses Earth as Tara, who is not the mother of all beings, but rather the mother of all Buddhas, and thereby the mother of those beings who see through birth and see through death. Was it Dōgen who woke, or was it the mountains and streams? When Snyder and the Mahayana tradition speak of mind, it is also mind that is the great earth. Dōgen says, 1 billion worlds can be sat through in a single sitting. That's from his Shobengenzo, Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. Mind and earth have the same deep structure. We are both inside and outside the world at once. A soft breath, worldwide, of night and day, rising and falling. The great mind passes by its own fine, honed thoughts, going each way. The metaphysics of conversing with Wirth's text is the practice whereby observer becomes observed. And rather than thinking time from the perspective of the mountain, Dōgen thinks the mountain from the great imponderable sea of time. Mountains express the emptiness of time itself, what Dōgen called time being. This is the way of the wild, the way of the wondrous, even miraculous Dharma, each of its Dharma stages unprethinkable. So I've just kind of reviewed part 1, which is mountains, rivers, and the great earth, and geology, poetic world. So part 2 is titled Turtle Island and includes chapter 3, place, land and sea, earth and sky, and chapter 4, bears, the many palaces of the earth. Dōgen writes, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs. We are the depths of our practices, and those depths express our interdependence, being as bioregion, the spirit of what it was and is to be there here. What is the liberatory, wild, great earth-centered practice of ourselves as place? Snyder and Wirth look to the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy, Turtle Island, the name revealed in their creation myth, Sky Woman, or the woman who fell from the sky. And through Charles Olson's analysis of Melville, and through Thoreau, and through the Buddha lands, Dewa Chan, or the Pure Land, Buddha fields, and finally Wirth considers the place from which he writes, the west coast of Turtle Island. The chapter on bears offers another way to think of place as one of the many palaces or worlds that co-inhabit the earth, which is also the way of speaking of Carlo Rovelli's relational information in the field of contemporary quantum physics. I love this chapter on bears, the place and practice of living in the in-between, the world between the worlds, dream time, on walking between the worlds with the polarities held reverently in each hand, walking the middle, holding that tension of the opposites is re-inhabiting sacred place on the luminescent, empty, pregnant void, a wearing ground of being. I don't invent things out of my head, says Snyder, unless it's an actual experience, like seeing a bear in a dream. That is a true mode of seeing a bear. In 1924, anthropologist Alfred Hallowell discovered the intercontinental analogies of bear ceremonies among diverse indigenous peoples that were as widespread as the worldwide historical range of bears. Michael Pastereau, in his revelatory historical study, The Bear, History of a Fallen King, notes that in Saxony and nearby areas, as recent as the rise of Charlemagne and the early German Catholic Church, the bear was venerated as a god, which gave rise to some forms of worship that were sometimes frenetic or demonic, particularly among warriors. Bears had to be absolutely eradicated to convert these barbarians to the religion of Christ. Faulkner, in his novella, The Bear, pondered, where does one travel to meet the aged god, Old Ben, who dwells, as shamans know, in the dreamtime realm? For Faulkner, as for shamans, as we know from the cave paintings and petroglyphs 28,000 years old, one meets bear only by entering the time and space in which the worlds and life forms of human and bear touch upon one another. Faulkner writes, Ike divined encountering the bear, shadowy in the limbo from which time emerged and became time. The old bear absolved of mortality, and himself who shared a little of it. The woman who married a bear was recounted by a Tlingit and Athabascan woman to the anthropologist Catherine McClellan in 1948 and published in her 1970s The Girl Who Married the Bear, a masterpiece of Indian oral tradition which analyzes 11 variations of the story. Snyder's 1955 Berry Feast studies this story of what he calls deep ecology, a territory where myth or folklore or shamanic constructions have to do with the way you treat creatures, whether or not you kill them. How do you kill a bear? The breakthrough marriage of anthropology and poetry in depth in Berry Feast set Snyder's work for the next 50 years and his version of the shamanic middle world, shadowy in the limbo from which time emerged and became time, in which woman and bear meet. Wirth unites Snyder's shamanic middle world and depth psychology with Zen practice in the writing of Dōgen, where in crossing this borderline, the marriage between woman and bear occurs in the same place as the words mountains flow. When the in-between, the flowing emptiness that is the insubstantiality of all beings, suddenly presents itself in its luminous darkness, it is astonishing. It is the upaya of skillful means or limitless possibilities by which we learn better to enter the depths of our internal and external landscapes. Jung said that the most important thing is how to live with the unconscious every day. I would say more within the unconscious, because it's this balancing again. While teaching us that the Great Earth is Tara with her endless arms of compassion, each one a palace, each one a practice. So there's an image of Tara. So this archetypal world of interbeing is also the Celtic otherworld, so eloquently, deeply explored by the brilliant Irish poet John Moriarty. I highly recommend his book, Dreamtime. Living in Irish myth, place, language, woven with the world's religions, when space-time was more fluid, where we easily walked through many worlds and intermarried readily in daily life. In this world between the worlds, Jerome Bernstein's Borderlander comes to mind. A Jungian analyst working for many decades in Santa Fe, New Mexico, alongside the Navajo and Hopi, who deeply informed his clinical understanding of the Western psyche's suicidal dissociation from nature. His book, Living in the Borderland, The Evolution of Consciousness and the Challenge of Healing Trauma, explores emergent borderland consciousness as a compensation, a psychosis, directly arising from the overdevelopment, the exclusive development of the rational mind. In borderland consciousness, the indigenous mind of non-duality and interbeing has arisen powerfully and is in direct conflict with the occupied identity, language, and culture. In borderland, nature begins to speak again to and through the Western psyche. Bernstein writes, our capacity to hear and take in and act on what is being said will determine our social survival as a species. Our animal selves, dancing with bear, living in the in-between every day, balancing polarized tensions on the luminescent ground of being, of original mind, we grow into greater resonance with our subtle energy bodies, our subtle body energies, the forms and their speaking, their continual arising and departing from emptiness back to emptiness. And while we behold them and work with them in active imagination, we can radically transform ourselves for further integration and growth. These lights are psychoidal, change and charge us physically, change and charge the physical world. Luminescence is resonance. Recently, Leroy Little Bear Blackfoot spoke of an elder who had refused to learn English, never spoke a word of it, but spoke 13 dialects of his language. And he told Little Bear, right now there are 33 new intelligences that are here for us to use to be in service to Earth. as she is helping us now see what we are doing. They speak heart language. We cannot use these 33 new intelligences with our subjectivities, our mind language. The fear and trauma is that we will never speak heart language because of our original trauma of separation. Little Bear made the point that these intelligences enable the massive ancestral trauma which we all carry to heal instantly. That is the way we will survive. In Jungian language, the psychoid and archetypal and synchronicity evoke each other, connecting us to the unus mundus. I'm going to run out of time before I've hardly begun. Somehow, I don't know what happened. So I attended a seminar last Sunday on the occasion of the publication of the first 3 of 28 volumes of the collected works of Marie-Louise von Franz, which will be out at the end of this month. Von Franz met Jung while in high school and instantly knew that her entire life was being laid out before her. She no longer had a choice, and she began analysis with Jung at age 21. I noted this from the discussion. The only rule of dream interpretation, and this was said by people who trained with her in Zurich, were training analysts. The only rule of dream interpretation that von Franz allowed was, if there is an animal in the dream, you are certain to succeed. Symbolization of animals in dreams rises to allow psyche to meet the transcendent and for the subtle bodies to become immanent. Some form of divinity is hidden in the animal undus mundus. As Hillman says, stick to the image and stick to the animal, the dream image, period. No more needs to be said. Van der Leue, in his 2009 book, Jung and the Sioux Traditions, Dreams, Visions, Nature and the Primitive, in his chapter on Jung and the Animals, writes, what is lacking in modern industrial people, including Jung, is the talent and sensitivity to pay respect to animals. They can be archetypal energies, but not embodied presences, whose lives can unthinkingly, unfeelingly be taken again and again and over again. This is Snyder's exact stand. For whites, Deloria continues, humans were the last to inhabit the earth and are therefore a crowning glory of all that preceded them. For the Lakota, humans were the last, and that makes them the newest, the youngest, and the most ignorant. Stories of encounters between human people and animal people in indigenous myth and history, in which the animal powers far outshine the powers of their intelligence, will, fearlessness, and clairvoyance, far outshine those of human people, as we know. The beetle people with antenna, hearing, sensing sounds far beyond human range, the animal people whose companionship, nurturance, unconditioned love, healing powers, judgment, leadership, and magical interventions. We all have these stories. Let me see if I can find the right images. I don't know what happened here. 12, 15. Oh, here we go. So, this is the year of the yin metal ox in China and in Tibet. Tranquil and imperturbable, nothing seems capable of destroying their composure or inducing them to quick movement. When winter snowstorms rage for weeks at a time over the Arctic landscape, the musk oxen gather in small groups and wait motionless until the storm has passed. For weeks remain motionless, then begin again to scrape out the snow from the frozen plants, their only form of nourishment during the 5 months of complete darkness. There is something to be known. Wirth's final chapter, Seeds of Earth Democracy, begins with a poem by Snyder. The blue sky in the land of old man medicine Buddha, where the eagle that flies out of sight flies. Snyder was once told by a Native American California elder that the diagnostic and healing hand of a trembling hand healer's hand was guided by an eagle so high up in the sky as to be out of sight. This is the healing of emptiness, the non-place in every place, and the manifestation of Tara. The Buddha embodied in the blue medicine Buddha, blue like lapis lazuli and deep blue sky, consider his teachings not so much as theories or philosophical arguments, but as a box of medicine. The healing of place is to go deep into emptiness, unleashing the wisdom of awakening and the compassion of emptiness. This is the site where the Buddha and the shaman merge. Buddha shaman is both archaic and brand new, an advent of the new old place of re-inhabitation. To help the healing of place, we must first heal the virulence, which we do to ourselves and is ourselves. Everybody is Aboriginal to somewhere, says Eshua Bolton, Australian psychologist, Aboriginal sound healer, and ceremonial leader with extraordinarily beautiful voice. Shamanism is the first science. All other sciences follow from it. Knowing consciousness and matter are married, united. The Buddha shaman has particular specialized powerful healing songs and must go back into solitude for more songs, which enables the songs to heal. The poet, as myth, handler, healer, returns human life anew to the wild, without and within. Healing clarifies anew the original mind or Buddha mind, who we were before our parents were born. The poet articulates the semi-unknown for the tribe, which is close to the ancient function of the shaman as a mediator of the unconscious. This is the paradoxical temporality at the heart of healing, to remember in a new way what you did not know that you ever knew. And of course, heartbreak is at the heart of healing. Wirth's book, I haven't finished it all, is 120 pages. It's very small, and it's definitely worth reading, calling us to cultivate our creative visionary imagination, which is a practice of wild knowing. So he does in this chapter talk about the seeds of Earth democracy. This is his final chapter, and it's very good. I mean, he does things like contrast Bhutan with its gross national happiness and all of that failures that it's involved in trying to realize that, with San Salvador, which is now completely owned by corporations, and people who were once all small farming agricultural people now are starved, and daughters are selling themselves as are being sex trafficked in order to get food, which is canned and imported from someplace else outside of San Salvador. And he also recognizes powerfully the brilliant, probably one of the, well, Forbes called her one of the 7 most powerful women in the world, Dr. Vandana Shiva. And she just has dedicated herself to alleviating the sufferings of people all over the world in reclaiming and re-inhabiting their lands. And she started in India, her home country, and is also a doctor of quantum physics. And she's just, it's hard to imagine one person can do so much in the world. She's been working for decades and decades. So a lot of, I want to close on something that I just heard. Thank you for a few minutes more. On a couple of nights ago, a speaker at the European Rights of Tribunal Council for Aquatic Systems, the Rights of Nature. It's part of the International Tribunal, and they're meeting once a month right now, 5 meetings from January to May. And, fighting so hard to get personhood rights for water, for air, and for life, and how much that doesn't make sense, that is necessary. Getting personhood rights when, the megalithic monomaniacal corporate person, quote unquote, has the right to destroy all life, while others are still fighting for the right to vote. But an unexpected speaker came who, apart from, all the panel who are all ecological, environmental scientists, and he's been an anthropologist for 30 years in the Amazon. And he said, roughly, the Amazon biome of tropical rainforest is not wild, untouched land. It hasn't been wild since the advent of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago. The rainforest we've perceived up until recently has been farmed. The dense population of its great expanse of trees is a result of human farming. The indigenous people completely, what they did was clear one small area of land completely so they could plant it with food crops. And then spaced in the food crops, they chose the healthiest and the strongest and the biggest baby trees and planted those. So that after 3 years of growing food there, they left and they moved on to do the same thing. And what happened was, and they probably didn't come back to that little ground of cleared land for many generations. But the young trees, carefully chosen, grew into healthy, strong trees, which is what we see today. And they didn't contend or compete with the ground cover, which unchecked results in slow, undernourished growth and would not have provided, amongst many things, the carbon sequestration, which we came to depend upon. So, that's just phenomenal. To think of that entire rainforest as having started to be farmed 10,000 years ago. Thank you.